Okay. This has been a tough 6 months for the church here. One thing we know, James 4, verse 14, what's your life? It's but a vapor that appears a little while and then vanishes away. I remember years ago, the first time I came to Alt Road, I was teaching a class downstairs, and it was on the book of James. And I had just read that verse and getting ready to comment on it when Richard Priotti, some of you may remember who he is, knocked on the door and said, "Bill, you got a phone call." And it was my dad. He said, "You need to come to UT Hospital when church finishes. Gary's woman has been involved in a horrible car accident. It appears she might have died." So I thought, boy, here, just no sooner than I read the verse, and then it happened. So we found out with Kaylee. Just in a few minutes, she was gone. And then Cheryl, I know I was trying to think with Rita, how long ago she found out she had cancer. It wasn't over 4 or 5 months, and how quickly she went downhill. Steve showed me a picture of the scan that she last had. It showed all the tumors throughout her body, especially in her lungs. I mean, it definitely overwhelmed her. The immunotherapy sessions did not work at all. And then with the family the other night, shortly after she passed, until they took her body away. But the funeral, as I mentioned, is going to be Friday morning. Death is something that no one likes to talk about very much, but the Bible comes to us with instruction about death. Can you think of a chapter that might, from the Gospels of Jesus, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, that has some information about death that would be helpful? We know there are chapters that talk about the new birth and things like that, and chapters that talk about the crucifixion, like Matthew 27, and what happens when life beyond the grave, Luke chapter 16. But can you think of a go-to chapter in the Gospels that reveals a lot of information about the resurrection, about life, and about death, and dealing with death? But one of the chapters that I always found helpful is the chapter in which the shortest verse in the Bible is found. So if you can be turning to that chapter in which the shortest verse in the Bible is found. There's the verse, Jesus wept, but where's it found? Where in John is that found? It's in John chapter 11. And so we're just going to do a highlight of some points of that chapter tonight. I want you to mark that, but there's another passage we want to look at first that's kind of surprising. Let's go back to the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 7. Ecclesiastes, chapter 7. When here in the chapter, Solomon is contrasting wisdom and folly and foolishness. And in the beginning of verse 1, he says, Ecclesiastes 7, "A good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of one's birth. Better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting, for that's the end of all men, and the living will take it to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by a sad countenance the heart is made better. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth." I had been preaching the gospel very long. I was living up in Cincinnati after I got out of the Navy. There's a guy by the name of Paul Young that owned probably the most popular funeral home in the area. He got most of the business, and I had the occasion to do a funeral sermon there. But at the second time, he was riding with the ambulance. Said, "I want you to come back and talk to me for a minute." Said, "Would you come by the office here in a few days and let's talk?" And for some reason, he liked me, and he said, "I want to make a deal with you." Said, he was probably in his mid to late 60s, but he said, "I know your heart's in the right place, but let me help you. I'll teach you things about doing a funeral, about teaching things about dealing with people who've died. I'll do all that if I can use you to be in an on-call status, because there are a lot of people here in the area that not attached to any kind of church, but they would like to have somebody who is a preacher who will do their funeral. Would you be willing to do that?" I said, "Sure." I thought there might be a way for evangelism and several baptisms that come as a result of that. And so for a period of months, I would go over there pretty often, and he would tell me a lot of things about dealing with death. In John 11, was one of the chapters that he really emphasized. So now that we're dealing with it again, I thought we might go ahead and just spend just a few minutes tonight looking at what Jesus had stated. By the time you get to John chapter 11, the subject is going to come up with the resurrection with one of the sisters of Lazarus. But if you go back to John chapter 5, you'll see that Jesus already discussed the subject of the resurrection. In John chapter 5, Jesus is talking about, partway through that chapter, he's equal with God because he's the Son of God. He has the power as God, and he has the authority. And look at beginning at verse 22 with me, John chapter 5, verse 22. For the Father judges no one, but has committed all judgment to the Son, that all should honor the Son just as they honor the Father. He who does not honor the Son does not honor the Father who sent him. Most assuredly I say to you, he who hears my word and believes in him who sent life has everlasting life, and shall not come into judgment, but has passed from death into life. Most assuredly, here comes the powerful verses, I say to you, the hour is coming, and now is, when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. For as the Father has life in himself, so he has granted the Son to have life in himself, has given him authority to execute judgment also, because he's the Son of God. Verse 28, 29 is the main verses I wanted us to look at. Do not marvel at this, for the hour is coming in which all who are in the graves will hear his voice and come forth, those who've done good to the resurrection of life, and those who have done evil to the resurrection of condemnation. I can do nothing, I can of myself do nothing. As I hear, I judge, and my judgment is righteous, because I do not seek my own will, but the will of the Father who sent me. We look at verses 28, 29. How many resurrections are there going to be? There's going to be one. Everybody be resurrected at the same time. Why is that an important bit of Bible knowledge and Bible truth? What's that? Well, because people have the rapture, they believe that's a resurrection. Then later on there'll be another resurrection. But Jesus here deals with the subject of the resurrection. There's only going to be one resurrection. What would be the event that will initiate that? The hour is coming. We can look at other passages like 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. When that hour comes, then what will happen? The judgment will take place. And Paul, in fact, let's just look at it briefly. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. As he refers to the hour and the trumpet sound. Verse 13, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. I do not want you to be ignorant, brethren, concerning those who have fallen asleep, lest you sorrow as others who have no hope. If you're familiar with 1 and 2 Thessalonians, you'll realize that false teachers, as they had in a number of places, had really had a negative impact on some of the members there. Some had listened to some of the things that were false, and some of the things they were saying was, you'll never see your departed Christian mother and father, for example, again. You missed it. And so you can imagine how perplexed and sad people would be if that was true. So Paul's going to straighten them out. Verse 14, for if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so God will bring with him those who sleep in Jesus. For this we say to you by the word of the Lord, that we who are alive and remain until the coming of the Lord will by no means precede those who are asleep. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of an archangel, with a trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and thus we shall always be with the Lord. Therefore comfort one another with these words. So here we see what happens. When that trumpet sounds, and there will be this grand resurrection. If you look at 1 Corinthians 15, how long would it take? In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye. And we'll be given a body. Everyone will have this body that will last how long? It goes from something that is corruptible to something that is incorruptible. Something that is limited to something that is eternal. So this body that will be given will last how long? It'll last forever. Of course, we know there's one or two destinations of which we'll go. And so for Christians, then that provides a tremendous amount of hope. So there's knowledge there that we can have about the resurrection. And going back to John chapter 11 now, there was teaching already that Jesus had shared about the resurrection because the subject comes up. So this is a chapter where the disciples are going to be taught certain things about death, and they'll find also certain things about the nature of our Lord and his dealing with people who are grieving. Verse 1. A certain man was sick, Lazarus of Bethany, the town of Mary and her sister Martha. It was that Mary who anointed the Lord with fragrant oil and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. Therefore the sister sent to him, saying, Lord, behold, he whom you love is sick. When Jesus heard that, he said, This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified through. So he's telling here the nature of what is going to take place. There's going to be an event. He's going to do something that will certainly share a lot of important information that people will need to know about God and how he should be glorified in it. Now Jesus, verse 5, loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days in the place where he was. So why do you think he stayed there? If you're a doctor and somebody says, I'm sick, what do you immediately do? Drop what you're doing and go. He didn't do that. Why not?
He knew what he's about.
Well, see, he knew what he was going to do. This is going to be a great teaching moment. So when it was heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to the disciples, Let's go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, lately the Jews sought to stone you, and are you going there again? Because where is Bethany, by the way? It's just right outside of Jerusalem, a suburb. Jesus answered, Are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he doesn't stumble because he sees the light of this world. But if one walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. These things he said, and after that he said to them, Our friend Lazarus sleeps, but I go that I may wake him up. When he said Lazarus sleeps, what was he saying? What was the point that he was making? He's dead, but why did he call it a sleep? He referred to death as a sleep.
You're going to wake up again.
Because you're going to wake up. If you go to sleep, all the days of your life, 365 days or 366 days a year, when you go to sleep, you expect to wake up. So referred to death as a sleep as what teaching point? Death is not the end of it all. Most people dread it like it is. So he says they sleep. Then his disciples said, Lord, if he sleeps, he'll get well. Verse 12, however, Jesus spoke of his death, but they thought he was speaking about taking rest and sleep. Then Jesus said to them plainly, Lazarus is dead. See, they didn't really understand the point that he was making. And I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, that you may believe. Nevertheless, let us go to him. So here in verse 15 is the key verse. So why did he wait? Why did he delay until Lazarus was dead to go and take care of him? Because this was going to be a teaching moment for their sakes of what? And it's a teaching moment for anybody, in any Christian, any age. Then Thomas, who's called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, Let's also go that we may die with him, because they expected. The persecution was already rising against Jesus. So when Jesus came, he found that he had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had joined the women around Martha and Mary to comfort them concerning their brother. Then Martha, as soon as she heard that Jesus was coming, went and met him, but Mary was sitting in the house. Now Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. Jesus said to her, Your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. And Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe that? She said to him, Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. So here are things. Here's a lady who already understood about the resurrection. What would be the purpose of this? Jesus waited until Lazarus was dead 4 days. Then he goes to bring him back from the life. Why this? As Kent well spoken, stories are there that last. We remember the context of stories. We remember them because we can relate to them. Why this story? Story, every word, every verse in the Bible for a reason. What's the point of John chapter 11? How would it help them? Knowing what he did at the end when he raised him from the grave.
It would secure their faith,
Okay.
but it would also teach them, apparently, Martha knew more about it than the disciples did.
Okay, that's obvious. And so Jesus, here again, this is a teaching moment, but how much do they know about Jesus' power at this time? Yes, Ken?
This whole time, he's pulling the disciples and Mary and Martha into this story.
Right.
He's preparing them for what he knows is going to be done. He's getting them prepared. He tells them he's asleep, and he says, "No, he's actually dead." And they're like, now they're into it. They're interested.
And why is it just from human nature's point? Why are they interested now? Because what happens when people die?
They don't know.
That guy, and I'm going to bring up what the finishing of this guy told me, the funeral home director Paul Young. He said, of all the sermons you preach, people will listen to you more at those funeral sermons than probably any other time. Was he right? Why is that?
Now it's personal.
Because now, when death happens, I don't care how busy you are. When somebody dies, that's a wake-up call for everybody. The older you get, what does it remind you of? Especially as you get older. When you pass by and review, there'll be visitation. You see that person's body there in that casket or urn if they've been cremated. When you see that, what begins to, especially as you get older, begin to enter into your mind? One day, this is going to happen to me. So I'm just saying it's a wake-up call. That's the reason why Solomon said, or the reason why I bring it up, it's better to go to a house of mourning than to go to have a party. Why? Because when death comes, what does that do? That's a sobering reality of what? There's certain things in the world you can control, but what can you not control? You cannot control death. Now, you can take therapy and prolong it, but if someone's got terminal cancer, at some point in time, we all are going to die. How many years will somebody live on this earth? There's somebody the other day that I know of that lived to be 103, and some are up to 114, but still yet, considered eternity. How long is 114 years? We all are raised up. At some point in time, Jesus will come back, and then they'll see him as he is, but every other person will die, will experience death on this earth. And so I'm just saying, death is a sobering subject. When you're up there, and I can tell you, I've probably done at least 200 funerals over the years. People are hanging on every single word. Why so? Because of the love and respect for the family there, because of the grieving, because of the pain that we all have in common. If you're small and never gone through something like that, you can't appreciate it. If you've buried a wife or spouse or family member, and you're now with somebody who's now going through that loss, what do you feel? You know what that's like when you lose a mom. Like, George and Greg Johnson, my good friends, went up there the other day, a week ago Saturday, for the funeral. They buried their mom. She was 101 years old. Is it still hard? It doesn't matter how old your mother is. When you bury your mother, be she 35 or 101, it still does what? It's tough on you. And so I want to be there to support them. You certainly appreciate that. The church was filled. You've been up there to Shelby Valley. That you hardly find another seat. It showed the respect that they had for them, for her, and also the boys in that community, for that family. And so it was a time when the preacher got up and preached. The preacher who baptized George years ago, he was there invited in to do the funeral. People are listening. And so now on this occasion, these disciples and Mary and Martha are doing what? If you were to measure if had an attention meter to measure their attention, how high is it? They're listening on every word. And so now we get down here, we know Martha knows thing about the resurrection. She already knows that much about it. But after the end of this day, now what does she know by the end of that day? She goes to bed at night. as opposed to the night before. The events of that day, Jesus bringing her brother back from the grave, even though his body had been dead for 4 days, already stinking. What does she now know about Jesus? What has she seen?
He has the power to raise.
She's seen his power firsthand because it touched her heart. It was her family. It was her brother. You can read about things about somebody dying and all that, and the paper's full of. But when it happens to you or somebody in your family, I mean, it's got your attention. And now the disciples need to know this, and so they see how Jesus responds. And then moving on, now there's another sister, and when she said these things, she went her way and secretly called Mary, her sister, saying, "The teacher has come and is calling for you." As soon as she heard that, she arose quickly and came to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the town, but was in the place where Martha met him. Then the Jews who were with her in the house and comforting her, when they saw that Mary rose up quickly and went out, followed her, saying, "She is going to the tomb to weep there." Then when Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she fell down at his feet, saying to him, what? "Lord, if you had been there, my brother would not have died." So you hear that it's kind of in desperation. Now the Lord's finally here, but her brother's dead, and she realized and recognized his power that he had, wishing he was there to take care of that. Verse 33, "Therefore when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her weeping, he groaned in the spirit and was troubled." Why would he do that? When he mentions the word groaned in the spirit, what's he referring to?
He's kind of frustrated. Y'all ain't been listening.
What's that?
I think he's kind of frustrated.
Well, I mean, when he saw their commitment, here's the response. When he saw the grief, what effect would it have on him?
He grieved as well
He grieved too. Why is that?
because of his love for him.
Because his love, even though he knew, here's the point I want to make, and this is going to be, maybe we may not fully understand every part of it, but knowing what he was about to do, why is he not in a good mood? When he sees the level of grief on Mary's face, what does his heart do by nature? It responds. It's touched. To what point? Have you ever seen somebody get bad news? I mean, the emotional outburst, I mean, it's tremendous. Maybe you've gone through that or seen somebody go through that. But here we see an emotional outburst to the point where it says he groaned in the spirit after seeing all of that. It said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." And what did Jesus do? Why would he weep?
Like you just said, he was touched.
He was touched by the grief in their heart. He still cared. So even though he knew what he was going to do at that moment in time, and he sees Mary and Martha, what are they going through? When you care about somebody, deeply, when they're hurting, what does it do for you? I mean, the Bible tells, "Rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep." We can understand that. Yes, Karen?
Feeling their pain.
You feel their pain. What's the difference between sympathy and empathy? Is there a difference? The difference between sympathy and empathy.
Isn't empathy where you understand what they're feeling?
Sympathy, you can see the hurt, but empathy, you've been there. You've gone through that. You know what it's like. One of the things I found out early on, when you lose somebody, like a mom or a spouse, when somebody comes up and says, "I know what you're going through," and they've never gone through that, how does that make you feel? I mean, can you get mad? Yes, you can get mad because, you have no idea. You'll get through this. It's nothing. I've seen people tell, she's been dead 2 or 3 weeks. He should be over it by now. What does that show a lack of? Understanding and intelligence of human nature. That person doesn't know. What might help them figure that out? When they lose somebody. When they go through this. The point is, and so Jesus, seeing the hurt. So here, there's a song we sing, "Does Jesus care?" Here in this situation, even though he knew what he was going to do, look at the depth of compassion and emotion filling up in his heart when he saw the hurt and heartbreak and grief of these two sisters. He wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him." And some of them said, could not this man who opened the eyes of the blind also kept this man from dying? So here's the question, having to do with faith. Does Jesus have the power to do this? If he did this, does he have the power to do that? And so this chapter is going to answer that. Then Jesus, again groaning in himself, come to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. Jesus said, take away the stone. Martha, the sister of him who was dead, said to him, Lord, by this time there's a stench, for he's been dead 4 days. Jesus said, or did I not say to you, if you believe, you would see the glory of God? Then they took away the stone from the place where the dead man was lying, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you've heard me. And I know that you always hear me, but because of the people who are standing by, I said this, that they may what? Believe what? So how much of the book of John is about testimony and evidences and proofs that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God? That's what a lot of it's about. He's defending who he is as the Son of God. And this is certainly one of the greatest testaments of that. Then he took away the stone from the place where the dead man was lying, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you, you heard it, and I know you always hear me because the people are standing. Verse 43, now when he said these things, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth again. As you probably heard somebody, why did he sing aloud his name? Perhaps. Everybody else come forth. And he who had died came out bound hand and feet with grave clothes, and his face was wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, loose him and let him go. Look at what remains. Sometimes we stop there, but look at a few of the verses. Then many of the Jews who come to Mary and see the things Jesus did believed in him. But some of them went away to the Pharisees and told them the things Jesus did. Then the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered a council and said, what shall we do? For this man works many signs. If we let him alone like this, everyone will believe him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and nation. One of them said, Caiaphas, being high priest that year, said to them, you know nothing at all, nor do you consider that it's expedient for us that one should die for the people, and not that the whole nature should perish. That's where we'll stop. The text got about 3 or 4 minutes left. When Lazarus came back from the grave, you think anybody wanted to talk to him? Why would you want to talk to him? What did you see? What did you see? But there's something unique about Lazarus. He came back, he would die again. And then what would happen one day that happened to him that happened to all of us at the same time? At one day there'll be that final resurrection that we read of that he talked about in John chapter 5. Yes?
Well, it's obvious from this passage that up until that point, nobody could even fathom the idea of someone raising from the dead. They said, you could have kept him from dying, but once you're dead, you're dead. It's what it was their concept, their belief. That they didn't even think about being totally resurrected, complete deadness. They thought once you're dead, you're dead.
And why? How long was he dead for?
4 days. So
there couldn't be fainted. Because sometimes there are people who pass out, you can't get a pulse, and then later on. In fact, I've always been interested in words, the etymology of words. Anybody ever hear the expression, he's a dead ringer? You ever heard that before?
Yeah.
Where that comes from, years ago up in Great Britain, places like that, because there were certain circumstances where people would wake up after a day or so, they would put somebody's body there in the casket in the ground. They'd have a small hole in a string that would connect to a bell. They wouldn't put the water over, they wouldn't put the dirt on the grave, but for about 2 or 3 more days they would leave it uncovered. If he did wake up, what could they do? Ring the bell. So that's where the term dead ringer came from. And maybe if there's people's
I
life.
wouldn't want to be in the cemetery when that happened.
That's be scary. But the point is, here's another example, and like Kent said in this lesson, every story in the Bible is there for a reason. What things do we learn from this story? How can you apply this to someone today? When someone's sitting there in the funeral home and their family member is the one being honored because they've died, even though Jesus cannot be physically there with us, does he still know? Does he still care? The answer is yes.
I mean, it's, to me, it's totally fascinating what people will believe and what they will do. Right in this first story here, right after they witnessed this guy raising someone from dead for 4 days, they goes to the high priest says, we gotta kill this guy. Because he's gonna take away our pride, he's gonna take away our position. Now, that's just the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. I mean, this is obviously man of God because he can do these kind of things, but they're still trying to plan it because they're more worried about their own positions than they are about the truth.
Look at Matthew 27:18 as we close. Matthew 27:18, to go along with what Kent said. Those rulers at the time that delivered up Jesus, what was their motivation? Matthew 27, verse 18. Here's what Pilate recognized was their motive in delivering up Jesus to the high priest, to Pilate. What were they doing? Because of envy, they did that. Envy of what? They wanted the power. They had the power and the authority, but they didn't have the respect. Who had the respect? And so, can you imagine? Have you ever heard in your lifetime someone who would even lie to remain in power? Has it ever happened? Turn on Fox News. It happens all the time. Who's guilty of it? It's not just people, politicians in Washington. Who else do that? And that's something, everybody sooner or later is touched by certain things of pride. We want what we've got. We want to keep as much as we can if we don't have the right value system for the Lord. Our time is up. Appreciate Robert coming to us today. He's got a great story. He's been reading his Bible for a long time. He's given me something that I've wanted to, he's told me about how many times he reads the Bible. It's impressive. I know that Bible has been his life. He's a great student of God's Word. So meet Robert before you leave. I wish it was at a time when the building was full. About 2 or 3 weeks ago, we had almost 80 people here, Robert. But we have gone through tough times with sickness and a lot of people out of town, and especially here tonight. We normally have a few more, but we're glad that you're here. I appreciate everybody coming. Thank you.